Okay, let me introduce first Policy Horizons. So I get to take a job that sometimes Christelle does for us today, which is my honor. So Policy Horizons Canada is the Centre of Strategic Foresight for the Government of Canada. We use foresight to help the Government of Canada develop future-oriented policy and programs that are robust and resilient in the face of disruptive change. We do this in a few ways: by analyzing the emerging policy landscape, by engaging in conversations with public servants and citizens about forward-looking research to inform their understanding and decision-making, and by building foresight literacy and capacity in the public service. We have several important areas of research. We have the research on the biodigital convergence, social futures, including social connections and sense-making, the next digital economy and the future of work, and the long-term implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have activities related to the Federal Foresight Network and things like Horizons Talks, which is why you're here today. So now I have the honor of introducing Christelle. And Christelle is the Director General of Policy Horizons Canada. And she has joined us with 20 years of experience in forward-looking strategy and policy advisory roles. She works with senior executives and policymakers, providing the insights, resources, and processes to help them turn long-term strategic thinking into action and impacts. Christelle holds an MBA from the Yale School of Management, a master's in development cooperation from the University of Ghent, and a master's in commercial engineering from the Free University of Brussels. She is a Fulbright Scholar, a Rotary Foundation Ambassadorial Scholar, a Global Leadership Fellow, and a Certified Professional Facilitator. So we are very thankful to have her here for this presentation. Let me turn it over to you, Christelle.
Thank you, Claire. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome, everyone. So we're quite excited today because we've been working very long and very hard on this foresight work regarding COVID in times, as you know, of great uncertainty, where the relevance of a foresight organization obviously has to kind of show its value, and it's such a relevant field to work on. So we'd be very happy to present you today some of the outcomes and have a conversation with you around the future of the post-COVID, hopefully, or the with COVID futures that we might be facing. So, but before we start to go into some of that foresight, on aimerait bien faire un petit sondage pour un peu voir comment vous, aujourd'hui, vous vous sentez par rapport au futur. Quand vous réfléchissez au futur, est-ce que vous sentez plutôt que le futur, il est plus positif ou plus négatif? Et quand vous pensez au futur, est-ce que vous avez l'impression de pouvoir le gérer? Donc, vous avez le pouvoir, les outils qui vous permettent en fait de gérer ce futur, que vous le trouvez positif ou non, ou que vous vous trouvez plutôt dans une situation où on est un peu preneur du futur et on ne se sent pas très bien, pas beaucoup en pouvoir en fait d'y faire quoi que ce soit. Donc, je vois que vous êtes déjà en train de voter. C'est super. Donc, on vous laisse un petit moment pour regarder ça. Voilà. On ne va pas rentrer dans les résultats du vote pendant ce moment. On va plutôt regarder ça à la fin, juste avant de faire le Q&A. Comme ça, on pourra un peu parler de ce que ça peut vouloir dire, les résultats. Mais avant de rentrer dans le contenu vraiment de la prospective qu'on a fait sur le COVID, I'd like to address a little bit kind of on why we might want to do foresight in terms of crisis, why it is so important. Like in normal times, when we think about the future or decisions that matter to our future, we're kind of relying on our knowledge. And that is knowledge about the past or about current situations. And we use that data kind of to forecast, to kind of predict the future. So it makes us more at ease to take decisions. Now, all of that doesn't work when you have a lot of uncertainty. And so when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit, we suddenly found ourselves projected in a world where you had massive uncertainty. You had social uncertainty, economic uncertainty, a lot of political uncertainty and geopolitical uncertainty. And so all of that actually came on top for a lot of people on an already existing feeling of uncertainty because of other disruptions that were ongoing. We already had a lot of automation going on, a lot of digitization in the economy. We already had a lot of income inequality kind of shaping futures and geopolitical tensions going up. So what we see then is that the way that people react with that uncertainty, with the fact that the future is so uncertain, people often react in two ways. There's certain people who say, well, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow anyway. We can't really predict the future, so why even bother? And they start to live day by day. Then you have other people, they start to worry a lot. They start to imagine all types of scenarios, usually negative, in a very unstructured manner, which creates high levels of anxiety. And so, although they're very understandable ways of reacting, they're quite unproductive when it comes to the type of decision-making that a government needs to do, because they inhibit kind of our sense of sound decision-making. They create knee-jerk reactions when we suddenly find ourselves to deal with some real change, and they're just not very productive. So, and certainly not in a time of crisis when there's so much at stake. So what's the alternative, you will say? Well, we would argue that's applying strategic foresight. So foresight, the definition we use is the assessment of what might happen in the future and might be needed in the future. And so it's strategic foresight is kind of, it's a set of a way of thinking, it's processes and tools that provide us with a more structured, more strategic way to engage with the future and its uncertainties. It helps us to think through alternative futures, a variety of scenarios, and that helps us guide our current decision making. It helps us anticipate potential outcomes, circumstances, so we can adapt to them. And it really helps us structurally think through what are some of the options that we have to move forward. So the good thing is, although this might all sound very often very complicated, is that a lot of people actually do foresight at a very intuitive level, quite often, every time actually you make a decision that has any type of bearing on the future. So, but in a time of crisis, when there's high uncertainty and there is just very high stakes, it's really worthwhile doing a bit more of a structured, explicit effort to work with the future. And so that's why we do foresight. And so we started applying that to COVID. But how did we then have to think about the future? Well, we thought about the future, COVID future in two different ways. We started to think about kind of what might happen, right? One perspective is what might happen. What might the future look like? How might things play out differently than we're expecting? And the reason you do that is to prepare for a range of scenarios, as we said. And I will quote here our deputy minister, or refer to our deputy minister, Flag, who says that foresight is very important because governments, prudent governments, they do not bet on the chances that things play out the way they expected it. Because it's easy for a government to kind of upscale certain policy tools that are already available, but there's a high risk of policy failure in situations where the tools need to be invented, adapted, and upscaled at the same time. And so we need to get prepared for some of those futures. We need to think through that. And a second way we thought about the future of COVID was in a matter of thinking about what future are we creating? Because as you know, policymakers and people working in governments, they're not just passive participants. Decisions are actually shaping those futures. So we have to think about what type of futures we want to enable. What does it tell us about what needs to be transformed, where we need to innovate, and how policy setting can help with that? So as the pandemic struck, just like all of you went home and continued our work, and we started to apply some of that foresight in order to help policymakers. So we started to really think about our main question was, what are some of these big shifts that we will see in the medium term? We were focusing on kind of medium term, as that is where policymakers were. and that challenge our policy assumptions and tools. We did a lot of desk research. We had a lot of engagements with different departments and agencies, and we talked to a lot of stakeholders out there. And all this was recorded in a document, in a report that is coming out publicly next week, if all goes well. But that document was already over the summer in June and July distributed widely within the government of Canada to help decision makers think about those futures. So we're currently also continuing that work on thinking about a more longer term perspective, actually consequences of COVID. So, but what did our research tell us? What does this report actually tell us? As it will be no surprise to anyone, we discovered that certain trends had significantly accelerated due to COVID. There's new disruptions, new possibilities, but what is sure is that the realm of what everyone thought was plausible and possible had extremely extended. So as we looked at the health domain, the major uncertainty that had been identified and that was mainly discussed will we be able to actually control this virus, whether it is medically or differently? And so at the time of the report, there was no vaccine or treatment. So that was an uncertainty. And we were also looking into what that means in terms of when there would be a vaccine, who would actually own it, and what that would mean in terms of who would have access to it. And some of those dynamics have been playing out over the past months, of course. But even now with a vaccine, the same question remains. Will we be able to control this virus, and when? Because there's still a lot of uncertainty about the global availability, as you know, the long-term effectiveness potentially of the vaccine, and the evolution of the virus itself. We were also looking into a critical uncertainty that is still very relevant, and it is people's ability or desire to stick to some of those non-medical policies to prevent, to start to control the virus, like physical distancing, and the trade-offs people would make in relation to that. As we're moving, hopefully, at some point out of the pandemic situation of COVID, there's other uncertainties that remain. For example, mental health. What will be kind of the playground of mental health? Will we see that this has been kind of a short-term trauma and things, we will move on? Or will there be very long consequences of this mental trauma being caused by the pandemic? Also very important, we think, is that we start to prepare now for the next pandemic, because they will come. Some of them might be more lethal. And so we need to not rely just on having a vaccine now and hope, that we get through the crisis. We need to start also preparing for the next. When we looked at the economics, there is, of course, still major uncertainty. Well, in the beginning, when we started doing this work, a lot of people were kind of talking and hoping for a V-shaped economic recovery, it was still called then. Kind of quick jumping back, kind of this COVID, the pandemic being kind of a blip on the road, and we would all go back to kind of the normal levels of growth, which that hope quite quickly left. So the longer that we're now actually seeing the pandemic lasting, what we're realizing is there is quite a story and a narrative to think through the fact that we will have kind of an economic K-curve. So in which certain countries and people and industries will come out pretty well from the pandemic, but many will actually suffer the negative consequences of it. And that will also, of course, be influenced by the uneven economic recovery, economic opening, which can be very different across different jurisdictions, but also across different parts of the world. And so the real impact to the economic, of how the economy is going to go will be revealed actually when the support systems probably subside, if we get back to those times, because then we'll see where the confidence, consumer and corporate confidence are lying, because that then impacts, of course, consumer and investment patterns, which impact the level of growth. But what we're pretty sure about is that in the long term, supply chains will be highly redesigned. And that is majorly because supply chains need to become more resilient. So for essential goods, with no substitutes, we think we might see a lot of reshoring actually, and local production. Some of it is already going on, but we can expect more of that in the future. And there's other goods that are really important, like food. We think there will be probably a continuation of global supply chains, but they will be more geographically diversified, so that kind of the impact of disruption in certain parts of the world doesn't kind of impact your whole value chain and stops kind of the delivery of your goods and services. But then there's also many products and services, they're not that needed, and market prices are very important. So those will probably continue to just have globalized value chains. And of course, we'll also see redesign of value chains, because there was, COVID has just accelerated actually an ongoing trend, which was the emergence of strategic competition between nations. Now, what's also very important in the economy is we did quite some work, which you can also consult on our website, about what will happen in the next digital economy and in the future of work. And we've seen major acceleration of that, of those implications. We're seeing a great acceleration, for example, in automation, and this time not from a perspective that companies or organizations are trying to kind of optimize profits in relation to the cost of employment, but with an objective to take out people from the system, because now people have become risk factors that you might want to invest in solutions to take that risk out. We see a lot of remote work that has been, we all sit here at home, I suppose. So we see a lot of cognitive work suddenly being done remotely, but we see also investment in technologies that allow actually to do physical work at the remote distance. So ultimately, it will create big shifts in how and where economic value gets created in the economy and in business models, which ultimately will have a lot of impact on prices, on rents, on wages, on interest rates. And so last point about the economy is that now we've all come to a conclusion and a situation where digital infrastructure is kind of the basis of your economic, educational, and health outcome. And there is a perception now that is growing and wondering where this is going. It's an uncertainty how this will play out, but how much will people come to expect actually digital infrastructure to be a public good is one of the major questions at play now. So beyond the economy, of course, how the health situation will play out and how the economic scenarios will play out will significantly change how the socioeconomic scenarios will play out, because there's a huge risk actually of the mental health concerns we've talked about, increased inequalities, decreasing social cohesion, and a lot more pronounced generational and regional divides. And a lot of the future will be shaped kind of by how people come out of this pandemic thinking that we're all in this together or not. On the environmental agenda, the big question remaining is whether the pandemic will kind of support or challenge the environmental agenda. On one side, maybe we as humans will have become a little bit more humble about our capacity to manage or to control biological disruptions, such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, the decrease in availability of natural resources. All of those options, by the way, have no vaccine option when things will really go wrong with it. So, and at the same time, it's important to note that if we go to an economic stagnation or recession period, that will fall kind of at the same time, literally in time in the coming decade, as when there is a lot of need for investment in the environment, on the environmental agenda. And so it will be key to see whether the economic scenarios and this environmental sustainability agenda will be a conversation of one or the other, or how can we achieve both at the same time. And so that shift in mentality will be really key to where the future will play out. And then lastly, governance, of course, lots of uncertainty in governance internationally and nationally. We've seen that over COVID, many of the trends that were already going on before have just been extremely accelerated. Nationalism, the declining rule-based international order, they've been extremely accelerated, and some people are now asking whether we're at the tipping point of changing system. And also a lot of questions about the future, of governments, which we all belong to, right? And what, depending on what the role is, what will be the economic models? Are we expecting actually the government to be a lender or a guarantor of last resort? What does it tell us about capitalism, liberal markets, democracy? So we'll see if we end up in a future where you have kind of siloed progress or systematic innovation. So that's kind of how we looked at different futures, but we also started, as we said, looking at kind of what futures are we creating as policymakers, as members of the government of Canada. There's a lot of talk, of course, about building back better, because although we could resume, some people are talking about resuming, business as usual, but other people are saying the model wasn't fit for purpose. And so what does it tell us in terms of what we need to transform and innovate on? So a lot of talk is about building back better, and that requires vision. We're also hearing a lot of talk about making the system more resilient. So where we have our economic, social, political, and environmental systems that actually support each other and help each other to withstand some of those shocks. In our report, actually, we lined out a number of what we call zeitgeist or spirit of time scenarios. And the reason we did that is kind of to spur some thinking about how collective decisions that are made across stakeholders, including policymakers, might kind of combine and coalesce in long-term decisions. Decisions are made every day in the pandemic, in otherwise also, but also in the pandemic, a lot of decisions are being made for the moment by businesses, by civil society, by governments, by individuals. And ultimately, they all will influence where over the long run, we will end up as in terms of spirit of times. Now, why does that matter, you might say? Because for policymakers, it matters because it creates your political space. It creates kind of a space that shapes what is possible in terms of politics and policies. And so we've identified three spirit of time scenarios. The first one is one of collective paralysis. The zeitgeist there is despair. It's a world in which mindsets and attitudes are very short-term driven. There's no risk taking. We're just trying to kind of get by. So this would be kind of a world where there's no risk taking. Everything is kind of, decisions don't necessarily make sense one to the other. And we think that would be a world with major mental health issues. A second zeitgeist that could emerge from this pandemic and the decisions is one of social Darwinism, where the zeitgeist is competitiveness. So this would be a world where the mindsets and the attitudes and the decisions have been based on individualism, zero-sum gaming, focus on economics, a world in which we would see a lot of inequality actually, and a lot of consolidation of economic power. And there is a third vision, a third kind of zeitgeist scenario we might end up in, which is the one of empathic growth. The zeitgeist there is more collectivism. The mindset and the attitudes behind it are some of empathy, enlightened self-interest, positive some thinking. And so what we're inviting you to do is when you make decisions, for every decision you make, take a moment and reflect on which kind of zeitgeist you are contributing to and make that a mindful exercise. So I will stop here, kind of the conversation, just by ending saying, as you know, as you see, there's significant disruption coming up. And although we've seen a lot of change over the past year, and we can see a lot of change coming up, in general, we overestimate the short-term changes, but we also very often underestimate the long-term changes, the depth and the nature of what that change might look like. So it's important to keep our eye on that long-term foresight. And the time to act to shape the future has, with COVID, actually excessively shortened, because a lot of decisions have been made. Things are going really fast. And so a lot of futures get locked in. So this is a time to act. This is time to get very conscious about shaping the future, in our opinion. So I will leave it here, Claire. We can have a conversation and maybe have the sharing of the polls.